But we must start when in the railway story in Australia. We start in 1831. Chris, this is where I let you pick up the reins and tell the tale.
Bit of a similar tale to what I understand is happening in the UK, where I think this year you're celebrating the 200th of this Stockton and Darlington. Which is causing a bit of controversy about whether is that the first railway or is it not? And I know you have your views on that. There's a similar situation in Australia. There are things. This thing was in Newcastle, the city of Newcastle in New South Wales, which is unsurprisingly a coal mining centre.
Yeah.
In 1831, there was a mining rail. It was a gravity worked cable incline thing that took coal from the mine, which is on a hill, down to a staith on the Hunter River. And I think they were hooked with two cables, and the empty one went down and pulled the full one went down, and the empty one pulled the empty one up. It was actually long forgotten, but it was in about the 1990s or something. People uncovered it. This guy down there is holding a section of what seems to be fish belly rail that he
it's a nice old
backyard.
Yeah, it's good.
And so the city of Newcastle was very keen to call that Australia's first railway. Is it? Well, it was the first thing that was shaped like a railway, but it wouldn't be what we would call a modern railway today, obviously. But 1831, that's fairly early.
It is early. It's earlier than in my head. I know that Russia was pretty far ahead in the charge on railways, but outside of the UK and obviously the Low Countries and France got there quite quickly as well. The US quite quickly as well. But Australia's a decent distance away. And it's interesting that 1831 is pretty early. It's a year after the first modern railway, as I would argue it, in the UK. But I suppose this is so. This is the earliest record you have of anything of wagonways and similar, actually. So okay. So that in a way that's also quite late. So if we jump to 1836,
this is a fascinating thing. This was actually a convict-powered railway built in Van Diemen's Land, or what we would now know as Tasmania, and it ran for 8 kilometres from near the convict settlement of Port Arthur to a place called Turana, and possibly, we're not sure, but might have run further to a place called Eaglehawk Neck, which was where the ships were able to dock. And it was, as far as we can tell, it was a wooden railed thing, and it was powered by convicts who were able. You pushed it. You can sort of see the illustration there.
Yep.
And they would ride down the hill, and they would carry goods and/or officers and gentlemen, no doubt, whatever, to and from. There's no physical record of this, but there's only written records of it, and it lasted, I think, until about the 1870s. So it was gone by the 1870s at any rate. Nobody knows what gauge it was. You wouldn't call it a public railway by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a very unusual thing. Really.
Yeah, it is. It's strange, and it's the idea of you sat in your top hat, feeling smug about the world, as four guys with frankly dubious reasons to be locked up potentially, or in some cases maybe either it's a scruffy person who ought not to be there, or it's a murderer pushing your wagon along, is slightly strange, but certainly not the last case, and certainly not the first case of indentured servitude being the way that you push the train around. But interesting. Wow. So then we jump to 1853, which is a fair old whack later. And we have, two things going on here. Firstly, a lovely bit of bridge rail that you've given us a nice slice of. But it's a tramway. This looks suspiciously like something that we had. 1807 was the first passenger, arguably the first public passenger railway in the Mumbles in South Wales. Old South Wales, that should be. Tell us about this. What's going on here?
Well, this was in Goolwa in South Australia, and it was built to broad gauge, and it was a horse-drawn tramway railway using, as far as I can, bridge rail. I was going to ask you whether that was bridge rail or Barlow rail. I don't know which it is, but I think it.
What? My gut would be to call it bridge rail. But
the purpose was, it was built from Australia's largest river is the Murray River, which runs from the high country in the east and south of New South Wales and east of Victoria, runs west, and it reaches the sea in South Australia at Goolwa, except it doesn't quite reach the sea. It actually empties into a lake called Lake Alexandrina, which, except when flows are really very heavy, doesn't actually even enter into the ocean. It just evaporates.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So and there was for many years, well until the 20th century, a paddle steamer industry that ran along the Murray River, a bit like the Mississippi, but on a much smaller scale, which took goods. And you could get it to Lake Alexandrina, but it needed a railway to take it across the short gap. It was about 11 kilometres to the port at Port Elliot. And this thing here was built to do that, and it became, so in that sense it was a public railway, but it wasn't locomotive hauled. It was built on metal rails, obviously. It was horse powered, and it remained horse powered until the 1880s, I think it was.
Yep.
So the South Australians, so we've got the South Australians who claimed that as Australia's first railway. We've got the Tasmanians who claim the convict thing as the first railway. And we've got New South Wales who claim the coal thing as the first railway.
So yeah, I was going to say, to put this all to bed, everyone, the first railway, if you're claiming the first railway, the thing to do is it a guided way? And do you have a fixed distance between rails? Then it doesn't matter who's powering it or what the legal structure is. It's a railway. So I have to go with the 1831 railway. I would go with as the first. But I'd be fascinated to know if there's some older, like, is there an older wagon way, even like logway or rutways being used as part of mining earlier than that? Because and again, it's one of those situations. Another valid reason for us mentioning the indigenous populations earlier on is that the idea that you don't have guided way technologies are kind of a natural human endeavor, actually, for moving masses. So it'd be, and as indigenous history is severely underexplored by us with a very kind of Western centric view of things. So I'd be interested to dig into that a bit more.
I know that some of the outback roads are known to follow the paths that the indigenous people used, and that in turn is based on celestial navigation.
Fascinating. Well, similar to the west, the east of the Great Road, the Great Way, the Great Path on the eastern seaboard in the US are thousands and thousands of year old paths, and that was following buffalo routes. The indigenous populations, the Native Americans, following buffalo routes and creating their permanent pathways that way. So but anyway, so we know that the railways have been around, in a nominally modern-looking form, almost as long as they have in the UK. Accepting that the railways have been in the UK since the 1500s. So an interesting little beginnings bit there. But the story doesn't stop there. So that was 1853, 1854. What's happening?
Well, 1854 this would be our closest equivalent, I suppose, to the Liverpool and Manchester. And this was the Melbourne to Sandridge railway, which is only 4 kilometres long. Sandridge is Port Melbourne. It's now known as Port Melbourne. It used to be known as Sandridge. And this was a broad gauge railway, which was built by a private company to connect Melbourne and that station there. It's a drawing of the opening day, and that is what is Flinders Street Station, Melbourne Flinders Street Station, which is still operating today. So that makes it Australia's longest established railway station. As we know, it doesn't look much like that now, but it still has broad gauge trains, and so that was the first modern railway in the Liverpool and Manchester sense to open in Australia. It was the first to open. But so this gives the Victorians a claim to Australia's first railway, and for many, 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 many years, indeed, it was common wisdom that this was Australia's first railway.
Oh, interesting.
But then the arguments started, and it was very parochial, of course.
People get passionate about this. I don't mind people getting passionate about it for the interesting history, but people just get geographically passionate about it and like, no, it's mine, which is I'm less interested in, which is a shame. Very briefly, very interested to see. Got to be one of the earliest or a very early depiction of a curved platform actually here, which is fascinating actually. Seeing, it's a wooden. You can see it's wooden because you've got the dotted lines, the kind of the faint lines showing planking. But yeah, very interesting to see a curved platform, particularly on broad gauge. Yeah, interesting.
I don't know why. Although the line behind the train, that would have just arrived, that train, if I've got my positions right. And you can see over to the left there, there's it's actually a bridge. It goes over the Yarra River, so it immediately turns and runs on a skew over the river down to the port, which would be over the horizon in the background. So it may have had something to do with that, but the platforms at Flinders Street today are not curved.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, very interesting. And yeah, you see there's one track that's got the sleepers visible, which is interesting. But the adjacent track, it's a double track railway here, is fully buried up, which is also quite, it's in the style that was much more traditional of the day, which is where you put the ballast right up to the railhead, or just short of it, which is interesting. So
I don't know how accurate the artist or how familiar they probably wouldn't have been very familiar with railways.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's quite an honest representation. I quite like it. So that was 1854. So then 1855. We have a much more familiar looking image here.
Yeah, this is the 1855 was the opening of the Sydney to Parramatta railway, which was 22 kilometres long, standard gauge railway, and it did open a year after the Melbourne to Sandridge railway, but construction started before it. But it took a lot longer. It's a bigger project.
Yes.
So there's no doubt that the Melbourne one opened before this, but the Sydney people will say, but we started this.
We started first, yeah.
And they were probably running, interim services when it was under construction. So yet again, you've got the
absolutely.
Fair dues. This line today is operating. It's one of the busiest lines in the country. Between Sydney and Parramatta is a very, very major suburban centre in Sydney, 22 kilometres to the west, and there's a lot of trains along that line today.
Yeah, and it's for me. The first isn't necessarily that interesting, and battling over the first isn't that interesting. There are elements of why things are first that can be interesting, but actually fighting hard for the first is less interesting than understanding the nuances and subtleties. Yeah.